Cycles that I don't want to butcher his name again, but I believe it's Milinkovic.
Yeah, Milinkovic. You've been saying it like that the whole
Yeah,
time.
and I would like
so
to.
I hope it is.
I hope it's right. But I would like to bring in a little bit of the Milinkovic orbital cycles.
Milinkovic, enter.
So the Milinkovic cycles include the shape of the Earth's orbit, which is known as the eccentricity, right? That's like an elongated, instead of a circular orbit, an eccentricity explains, and it'll show a picture, an elongated orbit. Also, the Milinkovic cycles have the angle of the Earth's axis tilted with respect to Earth's orbital plane. This is the obliquity, and then it also has the axis of rotation's point, which is the precession. And we'll see pictures of this to kind of explain it a little bit more. First one is the eccentricity. So it's on 100,000-year cycles. You see how it moves? This drastically affects
between
our climate.
100,000 years. It goes back and forth.
But like
that.
what all this is saying is that we're not on a perfect circle orbit around the
We're
Earth.
in a cycle of
Right.
orbit.
Like,
Correct.
yeah.
And now it also talks about this. This is what the second. This is scroll up just
we
a little bit.
tilt off our axis a little bit every now.
Yeah, I
and
was trying to get the word of. Is it obliquity? Yeah. So that one's the obliquity, I think. Yeah.
then.
And then the bottom one is our wobble. So all of these things combined, that's a 26,000-year cycle. I didn't read the one above it, but it's also a cycle on some number of years. If you want to scroll up to the
and
obliquity.
so they're all running through the
yeah,
cycle.
this one's in a 41,000-year cycle.
Yeah, they all, like you said, it's just not a perfect system. Like, we're moving in these like oscillate. It's kind of like you know, those little machines that you kick off, you know, and like when you kick them off into like the spin, they start doing their little thing. But it's not a pendulum. But they don't move in a perfect whatever. They'll just like
it's a transfer of
swing
energy
all around,
yeah.
but they'll just keep that energy moving.
So this was something that when I was seeing it in videos, I had to go look it up to kind of understand it. Because a lot of climate change videos that talk about science that are talking about ice ages and the periods in which we live historically, they mention things like this quite a bit. So I wanted to be like, okay, well, how does that affect climate? And it's actually pretty drastic. So when we do go into this eccentric orbit that pushes us away, and then you factor in the obliquity, the wobble, all these other things, you see that like areas where there are glaciers are going to have longer periods away from the sun. They're going to have shorter summers and longer winters. So we could see a drastic climate change that would happen over, maybe tens of thousands of years.
Oh, I see what you mean. Like as these cycles match up. So like basically you're saying like one reason why the glaciers might be melting is that area is now at a point where in all three of these cycles, it's actually closer to the sun than it was thousands of years ago. So thousands of years ago, ice builds up at these areas and then it gets closer to the sun and now it starts to melt.
Yes.
And so we're thinking that it's coinciding with anthropomorphic. Is that what they were saying?
Yeah, it could be accelerated by anthropomorphic means, a human means. It could be accelerated, but we could also be that within this cycle,
this is going to happen.
Yeah.
Regardless.
Now, if these things line up in such a way, it could be where we're causing our temperature to get hotter, and then all of a sudden we're closer to the sun, and now we're desert. Like it could drastically change the degrees in Celsius to ruin climates, to melt these glaciers, to raise these sea levels to a point where it could be catastrophic. So I would like to show you this video in the climate change document here. This clip here at the 7-minute mark.
Earth's climate cycle is the longest. And
real quick, I've met this dude before.
Oh, dope.
You met this dude?
I've actually hung out with this guy, and he broke down the stars for me, and like.
This was over at.
His name is Matt O'Dowd.
Yeah.
Wow. Shout out, bro.
Yeah, that's fucking.
I would
fire.
skip it back maybe 5-10
crazy
seconds.
Yeah, it's so crazy.
Small world.
Produce a much smaller effect.
This is pretty dense, but
So I've gotten this in personal life.
It's not entirely clear, but it may be that we're now so deep in the ice age that it takes all of the Milinkovic cycles together to cause the glaciers to retreat. Eccentricity and obliquity and precession must line up perfectly. The eccentricity cycle is the longest, and so the shifts correspond to its period. Okay, so we're now in a warm interlude, in the depth of an ice age. You might be wondering, when are the glaciers going to rush down from the north, bringing polar bears, white walkers, tauntauns? One thing's for sure, the glaciers will come from the north, The vast oceans of the southern hemisphere provide a powerful buffer against changes in temperature. Ice struggles to build up on water. But even now, northern winters see ice and snow cover the land, all the way down to the continental US, Europe and China. In summer, it retreats completely. But if the climate were a little bit cooler, then summer may not be warm enough to melt all of the winter snow. Then it would build up year after year, slowly creeping south. Now, by themselves, shifts in Earth's orbit aren't enough to radically change climate, but they are enough to trigger positive feedback cycles. As ice cover increases, Earth starts to reflect more incoming sunlight. Its albedo increases. More ice means less absorbed sunlight, lowering global temperature and allowing even more ice to grow. The glaciation initiated by the Milinkovic Cycles accelerates. A second feedback cycle is equally important. Cooler oceans are better at absorbing carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, and so the Earth's natural greenhouse effect is diminished. There is an unfortunate combination of orbital properties that kickstarts this process. First, low obliquity means less overall sun at high latitudes where the glaciers start. Second, high eccentricity means one hemisphere experiences a bad winter at aphelion, further from the sun.
Pause real
Earth
quick.
also moves.
Aphelion and parhelion are things that he talks about. So the aphelion and the parhelion, I'm not getting them right, I don't know. But one means the point in which you're closest to the sun, and the other one means the point which you're farthest away. And he's referring to the point at which you're farthest away right now. That was what that word meant.
Moves slower at aphelion, and so those long cold winters are not counteracted by the short, warmer summers. And third, the precession of the equinoxes sends the glacier-prone northern hemisphere into a bitter aphelion winter while the eccentricity is high. So when does this happen next? Well, right now, obliquity is decreasing, and it'll bottom out in around 12,000 years. It's currently winter at perihelion in the northern hemisphere, but it'll have precessed completely to the bad situation in 10,000 years. So, over 10 to 12,000 years, all of that points to cooling. What about the 100,000-year eccentricity cycle that seems to define the overall cycle? Well, actually, we're just coming out of a peak in eccentricity. That should have been bad, and perhaps it would have meant that the upcoming cooling trend would bring the glaciers with it. However, we may have dodged a bullet. See, the recent eccentricity maximum was a sad little peak, and our orbit remained pretty circular. See, as well as the 100,000-year cycle, there's a longer 400,000-year cycle on top of that. Roughly, every fourth eccentricity
see is
peak
price chart.
is
Yeah, that's
very
exactly what
low.
I thought too. Like y'all both
Structure.
y'all both cacked back, and I was like, this happened at every price point. Like there's a small trend, a long trend.
You can see that
And the
structure
next
though at the
peak
beginning of that
Yeah.
chart.
Yeah,
It's at the
resistance
same level
right
as that
there.
peak. Yeah.
You can see a triple head and shoulders pattern, and then a rollover right there.
Stable, low eccentricity phase.
Study price charts, people.
Because of this,
Uh,
we're in a long
ABCD pattern right down there on the 4.
stable, low eccentricity
Oh yeah, I
phase.
see it.
Mm-hmm.
Was that a
Because of
Gartley?
this,
Yeah,
climate
I think
models
so. It's like a
predict
butterfly
that
though.
we have
Yeah.
another 25 to 50,000 years of interglacial period left. And that's only if you ignore anthropogenic climate change. Human influence on the climate messes with the whole equation. With CO2 now at 400 parts per million, it's higher than at any point in the Quaternary period. It's been predicted that this may extend the current interglacial for 100,000 years. So we've probably at least offset the next glaciation, although it wasn't coming anytime soon anyway. The real question is, have we ended the entire Quaternary Ice Age? Also possible, however, the recent increase in greenhouse gases is so large and so sudden that there's no precedent anywhere in the climate record. This makes modelling our influence a huge challenge. But don't
That would
mistake
explain why
that
the
for a
models
lack
are
of
terrible.
Yeah, why we
certainty.
don't know. Yeah.
Our influence is certainly enormous.
That is super interesting. I didn't know that we went through glacial, like climate change every 400,000 years.
Yeah, that was pretty like once I started looking into the science of climate change and human acceleration and looking at it more as human acceleration and less as human caused, you know, because if you look at it as acceleration, you're saying, oh, natural processes which are happening that we're affecting. That makes more sense than the Earth's just doing its thing and we came and fucking peed in the ocean.
Doesn't it
and
feel
now
like it is though? Like I still get that. Like look at that chart. That's not accelerating. That's just knocking it out the fucking, like that's like us taking a bat and just.
Well, no, but
run.
I mean the thing is like that's an increase in CO2, which has an effect on the climate. But he's saying that it's not causing the changes that we're seeing. It's
accelerating
affecting
the changes.
Well, he
I don't
actually
even know if
said
it sounds like
we
it's
might have
affecting
been
the
might have
changes.
been dodging this change or this ice age essentially, but I see those as independent factors, right? Just like eccentricity works away from obliquity.
Yeah,
like
independent of it. Yeah.
Independent. So that too, I don't think that, you know, like he said, if the perfect storm aligns where all these things align, then you're fucked, right? With or without our variable. But then you add our variable in too, we could either override the equation altogether and just catalyst ourselves or whatever. But my point is, it still just doesn't seem like, it's not like we're seeing like, oh, this, you know, millennia is a little bit slightly uptick than the last millennia. Like we're literally off the charts with this shit right now.
With CO2 emissions, for
which
sure.
we don't know.
Yeah.
We don't know. That's the thing that I've always said. I'm like, you don't know what the Earth can handle. You know, like y'all don't know. Like the Earth's been around here for billions of fucking years.
Yes.
So the idea that you little infinitesimal human beings have some idea of what the Earth can and can't withstand is comical.
This
to
is
me.
one
perfect
thing-
though, because hold on, this moves us right into the greatest part about this, which is the Earth will and can survive catastrophic things.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Because 12,000 years ago or so,
Right.
we had a glacial impact in Greenland. That's what they think it caused the extinction of the megafauna, like the woolly mammoth era. Like the reason we saw all these giant animals go extinct 12,000 years ago is they think because of an asteroidal impact. I'm not talking dinosaurs. I'm talking megafauna. And this brings us to a really interesting video that Randall Carlson and Graham Hancock talked to Joe Rogan about this impact. Now, this is before they knew about the Greenland impact. In 2016, 2017, maybe as late as 2018, the Greenland impact came out. And they said about 12,000 years ago, this asteroid hit. These guys were talking before that, but talking about it as if it had definitely happened. Because they knew, based on the science,
that would
something
be
happened.
something that could have happened.
Something happened in the Younger Dryas to trigger this whole thing. So this is them pre that information talking about something that was later proven. And I think that's a really cool video to get to. We don't have to click it right now, but I'm saying like
You definitely need to
historically
break
speaking,
down the Younger Dryas to me.
I believe they
too,
do
'cause
that
you
as well.
keep saying that.
It's a period in
Only
time.
thing I still know about
It's
it
like
is
the
the funny jokes.
Mesozoic.
in
Yeah,
it.
it's a period of time in
okay.
history of the
Alright.
Earth.
Yeah.
I didn't know
He
if it was
actually breaks it
location or
down.
period,
If
so-
you pull this video back before the 7-minute mark, you'll see, if you go slowly, where he breaks down the periods. I would go probably back this way a little bit, and you'll see that was Milinkovic. Yeah, right there.
Our geological period is the Quaternary and is characterized by massive glaciation. Vast ice sheets stretching from the Arctic all the way down to the Missouri River, through Siberia, much of Europe, and spreading out from all major mountain ranges. Okay, sure. Right now, we're in a brief interglacial phase, a relatively summary stretch in which the glaciers have retreated. But these interglacial periods are short-lived. The Quaternary Ice Age has lasted 2.5 million years so far. Its 10 to 15,000 year warm patches are separated by glacial periods that last several times as long. The current respite is called the Holocene era, and it began around 11,000 years ago. Temperatures rose, glaciers and woolly mammoths migrated north, and humans thrived. This new era of warmth and plenty saw the rise of agriculture, writing, cities, and technology. All of our recorded, even our remembered history is of the Holocene. You might forgive us for imagining that these relatively summary millennia are normal for this planet. That is not the case. The current interglacial is already long. Does this mean that the glaciers are overdue? Is
You can
winter
pause
coming?
this if you would like.
To answer-
Okay, so if you go to the document, I have a quick, easy breakdown of the Younger
Somebody
Dryas.
definitely coached him about performing his talk. Like,
Yeah.
Like, he's definitely a scientist trying to perform.
I believe it's the Younger Dryas right there. That's just like a informational that just tells you what it is. It's one of the most well-known examples of abrupt change. About 14,500 years ago, Earth's climate began to shift from a cold glacial world to a warmer interglacial state. Partway through this transition, temperatures in the northern hemisphere suddenly returned to near glacial conditions. This near glacial period is called the Younger Dryas, named after a flower that grows in cold conditions that became common in Europe during this time. The end of the Younger Dryas, about 11,500 years ago, was particularly abrupt. In Greenland, temperatures rose in a decade.
10 degrees Celsius.
Rose 10 degrees Celsius in a decade. Other proxy records, including Varved Lake sediments in Europe, also display these abrupt shifts. Now, this is great to bring us into the video because it explains the Younger Dryas, and these are two guys that are experts talking about the Younger Dryas. I like to say dry ass.
Dry ass, yeah.
It's so much funnier.
It's so much better.
The document has a link.
It's probably that first one.
Mm-hmm.
Although this sounds a bit conspiratorial, I think the existing view of history is part of a mind control system in our society. It's something that we're presented with, that we take in with our mother's milk, and we're never supposed to question. I think if you control the past, you do actually control the present and the future as well.
So, but you mean if you have an absolutely established narrative that you're teaching and you're unwilling to look at any possible variations to that, you're saying like,
this is actually the second time somebody pointed to a way where you could like own all of civilization by controlling energy, but also controlling the past.
Yeah. That first guy said that.
Yeah,
too.
a whole different conversation for another time. But I think about when we talk about the Illuminati and stuff, and that's why I always say they're out there. You just can't put your finger on them because the person who controls the energy isn't necessarily the same person who controls the news, but they both control the fuck out of you. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like almost from an
And
authority
it just so
position.
happens that they all agree on the same things.
Sometimes. I mean, I think they definitely. I mean, they
think
would
they're
definitely
moving-
benefit from the same things.
I think they're moving to
exactly.
that point about climate change by saying that. Like,
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure.
And we know
Yes.
what happened and we know where we're going.
Yeah,
But
exactly.
if you say, shit, we don't know what happened,
Yeah.
then it's, well, then who are you to tell us where we're going?
Exactly. And
Okay.
it starts to raise questions over everything, actually.
Right.
Yeah, and we're kind of in this mode now where there's
That is the
a
logic
very
I used to.
large growing political agenda around the idea that humans are the sole cause of global change and that we're the dominant force within this whole process. Now here we come along and we're saying, well, no, there's actually been forces unleashed on this planet that really utterly dwarf anything we've done yet. What does that do to that paradigm? You see, that's what I think what we're coming down here to. Part of the
I like this guy.
the scenario now is that humans are
his
engaged in
beard.
causing the sixth
like the way he
great
talks.
mass extinction, as we talked about in one of the previous. And now we're coming along and saying, well, wait a second, here's
Also
something
looks like
from
somebody
outer
coached
space
you.
that has come in and caused the
You can tell
last
this
great
man's
mass
all
extinction on Earth. And what's interesting, I found, is that quite a number of the scientists that have been in the opposition to the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis have been in the forefront of pushing this scenario of human-caused mass extinction and blaming the extinction of the great megafauna that died out 12,000 years ago on human hunters, which, again, we talked about that, and I consider that ludicrous, that, Paleo-Indian hunters using spears are going to cause the extermination of 10 million woolly mammoths before they could even reproduce, along with 120 other species of megafauna.
Well, 65% of all mammals in North America were wiped out somewhere around that time, right?
Wiped out.
Mega mammals.
Mega mammals.
Which
the
is
big
over
ones.
100 pounds in body weight,
Mega
essentially.
Yeah.
Actually,
And it
more, like 75%.
75%.
75%.
And it was almost instantaneous, right? I mean, it was over a course of a very short period of time. that they
Very
were
short
wiped
period
out.
of time. The scientists who have been diligently working away in this field since they've published their first paper in 2007 have just brought out a new paper in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, July 2015, where they're doing a statistical analysis of all the sites where the evidence comes from. And what that tells us is that this is what is referred to as an isochron. This event 12,800 years ago. We're not looking at the effects of 100 or 200 years of events. We're looking at something that happened effectively in a single afternoon across 50 million square kilometers of the Earth's surface.
Ooh, that gives me goosebumps.
So,
A single afternoon.
You're saying that they're
all
talking
over
about this and it hasn't actually been discovered.
At this
to
point,
be
they
true
had
yet.
not discovered the Greenland
It
asteroid.
was still a
impact.
But
hypothesis.
he said,
still
he said the
hypothesis.
Younger Dryas impact hypothesis.
That's what he's he's talking about
They hadn't proved
that.
it yet.
Yeah, basically,
Huh.
he's saying that this is probably why it happened. The hypothesis is
Mm.
there was an impact,
Mm.
and then they later found the Greenland using new. We were talking about this about mapping forests or something with like infrared laser beams or something, or like looking in things. Maybe you know what it was? I was watching a documentary. That's what it was about how they were able to find these lost civilizations in the Amazon and stuff using this very expensive equipment.
Oh.
And that's the same kind of equipment that later went to them like finding the impact under these layers
Okay.
of ice. Yeah.
That makes sense.
Yeah, but we can continue if you'd like. This is,
Oh.
it shows a
The
really
world,
good graph. at one
everything
point.
changes forever,
Changes forever.
and it's fucked for 1,000 years.
Absolutely, absolutely. And then I'd like Randall to address this issue of continent-wide wildfires, because we do see this in the stratum, that when you get this superheated ejecta coming down on ancient primal forests, consider the effect.
This is Murray Springs, one of the Clovis sites, and this is what is known as the black mat layer.
Where's Murray Springs?
It's in Arizona,
Whoa.
and it's southern Arizona, and it's near the Clovis site, which is New Mexico.
That's the Clovis impact site?
Well, no, the Clovis site was where one of the first places in North America where human remains were found in association with extinct megamammals, such as woolly mammoths. And it's just outside of Clovis, New Mexico.
They refer to them as the Clovis culture, and because
Yes.
that culture was one of the casualties of this comet impact, the
I
comet
see.
impact is often referred to as the Clovis comet.
Okay. Yes. And many of these Clovis sites, and there's been over 50 of them around now documented over North America, I think about 2/3 of them have this black mat layer, which shows up very clearly in this image. Now, that black mat layer is black because of the considerable amount of carbon soot that's in it. So in other words, right there, that's the evidence of your wildfires, is that this blanket of soot over the continent that left this black mat layer. And below that black mat layer, you'll find extinct megamammals. Like here, you see the yellow arrow there points to the black mat layer. Now, if you look up, you'll see how it's more buff colored. That was the color of all of this, but the soot that was in that black mat layer has dispersed and colored the other adjacent layers. But you'll notice the bones below are the bones of extinct mammals. The bones found above it are extant or still existing mammals. And that layer separates these two domains of extinct mammals and extant
Like
mammals.
just a very clear line.
Yeah, and you can see it shows up so clearly right.
To people who are listening to this, when we're looking at the original image that Randall showed, it's almost like an Oreo cookie. Like there's just a clean line.
12,000 years ago or 14,000 years ago, whatever, this impact caused a layer of burning wildfire
Fire all
carbon
over the
dioxide
goddamn-
up into the air to a level where we were finding like archaeological evidence of it.
Yeah, I can imagine like giant swaths of the entire different continents on fire, producing a lot of carbon emissions and shit like that.
Yeah. So
This
what
is
you were
also
saying
an
that triggered
asteroid.
this and me into
Yeah.
this was that, the
It's-
Earth can survive. The Earth's
Oh yeah. Well, that's one thing I've always really disliked about it, just because, again, I'll say it, like the way you discuss things and the language you use will change the types of ways that you'll think about things and the solutions that you'll come up with. So when people make this like claim that we're gonna save the planet, as if the planet is like this living thing that needs saving from us, like that's not really the case, because one, that makes us look really bad, and it makes the planet look like it's like this dying thing. But the planet is not a living thing. Like the planet is a thing that sustains life. It has life on it, and the process of life is happening on it. But there was a time when there was not any life on the planet, and I mean, assuming if it goes long enough, there will be a time when there isn't any life on the planet again.
and its climate is going to change. It's going to change drastically. We're going to have ice ages. We're going to
There's
have impacts.
quite a bit about this place that we have yet to really understand, I think, is really what this describes to me. Like if you're saying a few years ago they just discovered that for sure another impact happened that wiped out 75% of the large mammals on the continent, which is like a replication of what happened to the dinosaurs, which is like a replication of these Clovis people. Like,
This
seems
is
like
that
that's
impact.
probably, yeah. Oh, yeah. So, I mean,
This
that's what I'm
is
saying.
that
Like,
impact,
yeah.
yeah.
Those two impacts are like, that would lead me to say, like, the global, like, the climate change thing is going to happen after the impact, which means that we should really be worried about the impact.
My question is, was there already an ice age popping, or this asteroid hit and created?
The asteroid
this
hit where the glaciers were,
and then melted them, and
Right.
then that's what caused an ice age.
Yeah, massive floods. It's
Well,
kind of
it ended the ice age. Is basically what
yeah.
you're saying.
It made this period.
And it made this period where it's like very warm, and then humanity started to thrive. It was the Halcyon or whatever period that the guy that you had met talked about. That's basically this impact is what started that period. It completely altered the climate to a point where it was a lot warmer, and there were a lot more opportunities for life to. Because let's not forget the greenhouse effect. Like it's called that because we use greenhouses to promote vegetation growth. The more carbon dioxide in the air, the more fuel for vegetation. Plants. Yeah, for plants. And so you can imagine right after this happens, melts all these glaciers, water flows, like fresh water flows all over the planet. It warms the temperature up, and it creates an environment with tons of CO2, creating all these new vegetative growth right after the world's largest forest fire, basically, which is when the most growth happens, is after fires. And you can just imagine how that set up this whole period that we have now become alive in. Like, we're now in the remnants of this period that was started when this impact happened. And I think it kind of ties into what the last guy was saying in the other video. It kind of sounded like he was saying that we actually mitigated that impact, and our added impacts mitigated what should have been a really tough winter, considering we were far away from the sun. And it sounds like what he was saying was that we're going to come back close to it, but when we come back close to it, we'll have all this greenhouse effects, which could lead to like an extremely bad heat wave or something like that.
Yeah, he was referring to like a more drier, more heat.
Right, because as we come back around that orbit to the parenthal or whatever, the other side that's closer to the sun, but we now have all this added stuff that made it nice when we were in the cold time, but now that we're going to circle around and be in the hot time, it's going to be terrible. And so it's like, you can imagine how that might have some problems. Mm-hmm. So it's like it saved us, and then it's going to cook us to death.
It's very interesting.
Well,
to look
even
at nature.
still, though, we put more CO2 in the air still than that whole period did. So, I mean, because like he said, that dude was pointing to the other graph. We're still fucking off the charts with it. Even
when you go back to the
I guess I assume the dry-ass is somewhere.
No, right here, thousands of years before present. So it was like right.
So actually, that would be that huge increase that they're talking about would be that's 100,000 years ago.
Like right here.
This happened 12,000 years
that
ago.
Interglacial period.
That huge increase that you're seeing was dry ass
human,
impact.
No.
Wait,
this lived through the ice age.
Through the younger Dryas?
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, crazy! I did not know.
Yeah,
that.
we were alive. That's what they were saying. The Clovis era, that was the first.
I mean, I guess I did know
that
because there's they've discovered cavemen and stuff in glaciers.
Yeah, we hunted mammoths and saber-tooth tigers.
And this also leads to the idea of Göbekli Tepe, where it's like this idea that we were not agricultural previous to this younger Dryas impact
because the climate was too cold.
Yeah, the climate became an ice age, and we were able to survive it. And when it came back, and we, in this tab right here, it shows the graph. So there's the younger Dryas period right there, the cooling period. See, it came back up and became livable again. And so when it came back up and became livable again, all of a sudden there was agriculture, there was farming. All those things began to take off in Mesoamerica, in Europe, and all these other areas. And they think that's the whole idea behind the seed civilization theory, is that someone had that technology previous to the impact and was able to hand it down to the people that survived. That was the whole Atlantis theory, the fingerprints of the gods theory, is that a seed civilization planted this agricultural technology into these peoples that survived this period.
Or maybe just the land started to, produce
that too. But they talk about the floods
conditions for
because one thing we haven't discussed about the younger Dryas is there was massive flooding.
I'm still really kind of confused on it too, because the graph shows that it was hot and then it got really cold, but then this meteor stopped that cold from happening and corrected it essentially. So there was two abrupt changes that happened.
So
it
was
abruptly
very,
got cold,
very cold,
and then it abruptly got hot again. And I was wondering, when it said that it happened over this decade, was that the getting hot part again? In Greenland, temperatures rose 10. So then this was, it got hot. So I guess that's what they're saying. This meteor hit, and then that melted everything and like turned everything back to normal pretty quickly.
Well, I mean, I don't know if it's normal because that side of the graph is much higher than the other one. I think what it is that, like I said, if you combine what he said with the first guy, then it sounds like this left side of the graph where it's low is like the part where we were in the eccentricity, the larger, like the longer side of the eccentricity, where we were further away from the sun, and it was colder, and then the impact happened during that time, which then drastically heated the whole thing up, even though we were supposed to be in a cold era, which would coincide with how we thought that it would continue, where we come back to a hot era, and it's extremely hot because now we've had this impact that totally fucked everything up in the quintet cycle or whatever the fuck that guy was calling it. Very sciencey shit.
It's very interesting. Yeah.
Very sciencey.
It's very interesting.